And welcome back to the Cage Rage podcast. This is Devin, and today we got a special event going on here. It's going to be the introduction. This is a day to mark on our calendar here at the CRP. It is the formal introduction to Amanda Schutte, our new CRP analyst, and I'm going to let her, because she knows herself better than I know her, explain a little bit about herself and what she's wanting to contribute to the CRP, why she likes MMA. But just before we go into all that kind of detail about, the sport and all this stuff, Amanda, why don't you just tell us a little about yourself?
So I specialize in nonprofit development. I am a mom. I have 4 kids. I'm a medical assistant by trade, and I really just enjoy fighting. It's something I started watching about 7 years ago with my husband very consistently. And so we haven't really missed a fight card, at least not a Saturday night fight card, in almost 8 years. So I just try to help out people where I can. And when I learned about you guys, I was friends with one of the other analysts, and we were talking about something. He didn't even know I was an MMA fan, and he was like, "Oh my goodness, this should be a thing. We should try this." So here I am.
So you got it kind of marked down to about 7 years ago when you started watching the UFC. I remember very specifically what the first card I watched live was. It was UFC 60. It was Matt Hughes versus Royce Gracie. Do you have like a remember? Do you remember the exact event that you remember?
But I can tell you. So I have 2 really funny. So I can tell you my very funny story about why I had to stop watching it, and then I can also tell you. So the first time that I ever actually watched MMA was back when it was on DVDs, and I rented them at Movie Gallery. So that was when my kids were much younger. So that was probably closer to 12, 15 years ago. They were in the mid 40s. So I was seeing like Randy Couture, and it was amazing, right? It was the prime, in my opinion, the classic prime time of MMA. So I was watching that, and my kids at the time were 1 and 3, and my son was 1 and my daughter was 3, and they're 13 and 15 now. But my daughter was laying on the couch with me, and my son kind of like wrapped his arm around her neck, pulled her off the couch, and climbed on top of her and started kind of throwing elbows at her. So I quit watching for a little while because I realized maybe this wasn't family friendly. When my son was a year old, he didn't quite understand what was safe and not safe. So I stopped watching for a little while. And then when I met my husband, he just kind of watched it randomly. And I was like, I really like this. I've always liked this, but now, I have somebody to watch it with. It's kind of like our Saturday night Netflix and chill.
Fighting and chill. I love it. But did you ever think that there would be a time when you'd be reporting on this kind of a sport? Because, it's kind of a blood sport. It was kind of on the fringe for a lot of years, especially back when I started getting into it. It was just now really gaining a lot of popularity. And you talking about going to the movie store, I remember specifically in my teenage years, me and my cousin, that would be a Friday night for us, would be going down to Family Video and seeing if we could, what UFCs they have in stock and that aren't already taken, and trying to watch UFC 1, UFC 2, and as you mentioned, like the Tito Ortiz, Randy Couture, Chuck Liddell early days, and it's becoming kind of I noticed that it was kind of a shorter history that I could actually grasp onto, that wasn't going to take me years to actually delve into like something like boxing would. Right. And it quickly became an obsession, and now here we are reporting on it. I never would have imagined we got this point. What about you?
I would definitely say the same. I was always one of those women that said, how do you know all the baseball statistics and the football statistics and everything? How do you know that? And now I'm like, okay, I get it. I get it. I have to take back all the crappy comments. Like, I totally get it. So yeah. It's something I never really thought that I would be talking about. It's just kind of a hobby. I don't generally put a lot of energy into things that I just enjoy. I enjoy my work, but usually I'm very goal focused. So I'm very excited about this. It's going to be interesting to see how it goes.
Well, I'm really excited to see what you're going to bring to the table, because just talking to you off camera, you've had some ideas that I think are really interesting that I want you to share with anyone who will watch this video. Something that revealed to me a little bit about who you are and your character and what you're seeing when you watch sports reporting and just the news in general. Is you made a comment to me about how we talked a little bit about Outside the Cage, which is a segment that we're starting here on the CRP. And we talked about just what kind of personal, independent ventures with the CRP would you want to bring to the table. And you brought up that you feel that there's too much focus on the negativity of athletes outside of their profession instead of focusing on the positive. And I thought that was really profound and interesting that you brought up that we in the media don't focus near enough on the good. Do you want to explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, and it's not necessarily that we don't focus on the things that the guys are doing good, and women, they're doing good outside of the cage. It's more of, I was very frustrated that we wouldn't hear about it until someone got in trouble, right? So when someone would get in trouble either outside of the cage or inside of the cage, testing or whatever, all of a sudden the media would be talking about things that they were doing in their community or efforts they had been making to try and better a situation. And it's just so frustrating that there are so many great fighters out there that recognize the struggles they came through to get here and really are trying to give back to the community. You got Francis Ngannou. He opened the first ever sports combat center in Cameroon, right? Like, that's huge, but we don't find out, you don't really hear about that kind of stuff. Tyson Fury the other night, it's a little out of my realm, but the other night I saw an article about where he had donated like all of his winnings, all of them, to, if I remember correctly, the homeless population. So for me, when I see that kind of thing, that speaks to my own personal passions, because I'm very dedicated to just working in the community and trying to lift people up and meet them where they are. And so I really wanted to highlight these amazing things that these bloodied, broken, beaten, with a smile on their face fighters have outside of that, because they're more than just fighters.
Yeah, and I think with MMA, we get, in combat sports in general, unfortunately, there's still kind of a social taboo. I think it's broken a little bit over time, but there's still kind of this social taboo of this. You get kind of a profile of what you think it means to be somebody that competes in these kind of sports. And a lot of times I've met some people that if it were not for mixed martial arts, if it were not for that, translating that energy, that motivation into that discipline. I know for me, at 16 years old, I was an undisciplined, lazy, self-conscious, insecure kid, and it came out in a lot of bad behavior. I got in a lot of trouble when I was a kid, and then I ran into David Love, who's going to actually be your first profile. We'll talk a little bit about that. And I got into MMA, and then I found a legit coach that was able to give me structure and discipline and taught me, and would show up on fight nights when I was partying and watching the fights, and he would show up the next morning and look me dead in the eye and say, if you roll with dogs, you're going to get fleas. If you want to be a champion, if you want quality, you got to run with quality. You need to, that this needs to be, that your whole environment needs to be structured and ordered if you want to be successful at this. And I don't think that people realize what it takes to be a fighter and the kind of outside the cage discipline that it requires. And I mean, everything from your diet, everything from, refraining from drugs and alcohol, the people you run with, the amount of time it takes to train and get good at the discipline. And then, as you mentioned, you got a lot of these people that get successful with it, and then they give that back. They start wanting to push that on to other kids that they knew that they can relate to that they know that this is going to give them some structure and them some discipline, and it becomes a great thing for the community. And I think it gets a bad rap too much. So that's why I think it's going to be a great thing to see you profile some of them stories and to give people a accurate representation of what some of these who these fighters are.
Right, absolutely. I mean, we have guys like, look, everybody knows Stipe and that he's a firefighter and he's this like really great down to earth person outside of the cage. But then look at Eddie Wineland. He's a firefighter. People don't really talk about that. And his story, if you go back and read his history, his reasons for being a firefighter are a little bit different than what Stipe came with. So it's just really interesting to take a look at these guys and look at them, you know, because if it were football, we would all be celebrating their foundations and their NFLPA camps. And, you know, that would be the big thing. It'd be all over the news. But nobody's out there like, this guy just went and coached some high school kids. They had a state championship coming up, you know, maybe that's a wrestling team. They just went and coached some kids, right? Like, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about these guys and women, any fighters that are stepping out there and saying, hey, I'm here. Yes, I'm this person on TV. Yes, I'm this person in the media. Yes, I have sponsors and campaigns and ads. Maybe I'm in a video game. But I still know how to wrestle, and the moves are all the same, and checking the oil is checking the oil. So let's practice.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm looking forward to this. And we got a lot of potential with this type of motivation to spotlight the good in this sport. And I think it's something that's been needing to be done for a long time. And I think accurately telling the story about what, you know, Chad mentioned to us a little bit in our CRP thread behind the scenes, that you coming along, that we need to get these interviews. We need to go high, as you just brought up with Eddie Wineland and other fighters. We also need to go back in time and look back at the history and see what these people went through, the blood, sweat, and tears, and the sacrifices that they did that legitimized this sport at a time when there was some real dark ages in this country.
Oh, yeah.
when it comes to MMA, where it was banned even from pay-per-view. That's hard to even believe. You had John McCain out talking about calling it human cockfighting and wanting it banned from even being a recognized sport. It wanted it to be illegal. And there was
the juxtaposition. The thing that's interesting, just to add to that, is that wasn't that long ago, right? And now we have these fighters like Sage Northcutt that have literally been training from the time they were 3 and 4 years old, and they're coming up as an MMA fighter. They're not coming up as a wrestler, as taekwondo, as judo, jiu-jitsu. They're coming up as MMA. And that whole new breed, you know, we thought like John Jones, we thought that was the new breed. I don't think so. I was watching the Access TV fights last night, the Legacy Fighting Championship fights last night. Let me tell you what, that was an amazing card. I didn't even expect it. I'll be honest, I didn't even know it was on. I got home late, turned on the TV. There it was, watched the whole thing. And you had 4 first-round finishes. You had 1 decision. You know, you had a DQ at the end, which awful. We'll talk about that later. But it's just, if you look back, like you were saying, with human cockfighting and John McCain and how short of a time ago that was. And now you look that any time, day or the night, you can just about find some sort of combat sport on the television. They're legalizing betting here in Indiana come July 1st, right? And so you take all of that and then you see these kids that are just out there doing it. That's why this side of it is so important to me, because these kids are learning to be an MMA fighter from the time they're 2 and 3 years old. What are they going to do when they hit that like roughly 40 year mark? And their body says, I'm done. I can't do it anymore. They need to have an identity outside of that. And I feel like this series will really highlight what fighters are besides just fighters. and let people see that you can have an identity after fighting. You can walk away and protect yourself from having CTE. You know,
Yeah,
you can
that's such a profound thought there, because I have known people personally in my life that from grade school, they're known as, Mr. Badass, if you will. They're known as, that MMA fighter. They get to and sometimes it's their mid-20s when they realize, well, I'm not in the UFC. This didn't play out like the goals I had. But then they got to readjust their life to, okay, I'm not so-and-so the fighter. I got to go get a real job. I got to do this. And that's a hard transition when you wrap your whole identity up in being a fighter. And I think that that's something that is a really interesting thing that a lot of people don't talk about, is how, these fighters, they become their persona. They become, Chuck Liddell becomes the Iceman. Anderson Silva becomes the Spider. These guys become that persona. And then we're surprised when they're fighting into their 40s and BJ Penn becomes the Prodigy. He's on a 7 or 8 fight losing streak. And we're surprised that he keeps stepping back in there. And it's because it's all he knows. That's
when someone has to step in and say, you're done. Just like the coaches throwing in the towel in between rounds, you get your eye split open, you have an arm broke and you're not telling anybody about it. The coach says, no, we got to protect you. Chuck's great. Chuck is finally starting to talk normal again. Mm-hmm. He doesn't need to be in a ring.
I mean, that was ugly that even a promoter, because I compare it, because I know just from experience, even with a trainer, that fighting is such an individualistic sport. You're the one getting in there. There's people that can help you out to train and make you better and stuff. And it is a team effort in that case, but ultimately you're the one who gets in there and is doing it. So the people around you, even closest to you, they can try to talk some sense into you, but a lot of times that doesn't work. They're still going to want to get in there. But when you look at these promoters, they're the ones that should really get the bear the shame, because to me it's like a bartender that's not cutting off somebody that's clearly drunk. And the idea that Oscar De La Hoya and Golden Boy would promote and live off past glory of Chuck Liddell's name and throw him in there at 48 years old, clearly with massive CTE and totally punch drunk, not in any condition to go in there and fight, and go in there against a guy in Tito Ortiz who he beat handily in his prime, and to see him go down in the first round like that off of one clean punch. I mean, it was so sad and disgusting, in my opinion, that they would even let him in there.
BJ fight. It's the same thing. You have this like deep love of these fighters that essentially I kind of grew up with, right? And so for me, it's so sad. I don't even want to watch, right? Like, I don't even really want to turn it on. I don't want to give them the ratings. I don't want to give them the credit. I don't want to pay for it. I want them to know that I'm not really okay with it.
Yeah.
It's not really okay.
It's not. And we getting people to, I think me and Chad have talked a lot about this, about George St. Pierre. If there's anybody right now that should write books about how to properly manage a fight career, to me, it's George St. Pierre, because he had one really, really hard fight at the end of his title reign against Johnny Hendricks. And Johnny Hendricks arguably won that fight. I believe Johnny Hendricks did win that fight, but they gave the decision to do it.
I mean, he was worthless after that, but he won it.
Yeah, and he was. I mean, there's a lot of things we could talk about with USADA coming in and all this stuff, but George St. Pierre took that hard fight, and he gave up the belt and walked away. Said he needs some time. He's fought one time since, when he came back against Michael Bisping, a fight he knew he'd probably win, and he's really been dragging his feet on. He's willing.
That pisses me off. I'm so mad about that. I'm so mad about him coming in and challenging Bisping. He was just like, "You're. Am I allowed to cuss?"
Yeah, you're all right. I mean, if Miguel and Chad, you're not going to outdo Miguel and Chad. So
I was like, it's just one of those things where I don't know. You just can't. That's all.
I don't like it either. I think it's completely disrespectful to those that are fighting their way up the rankings. But at the same time, combat sports is a sport that you're going to have the random spectacles. You're going to have the random Mayweather versus McGregor's. You're going to have the
had to fight on his contract.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So he had a fight left on his contract. They didn't, like, he didn't come in and say, Dana, I want a contract for 1 fight or 2 fights. Like, he had a contract. Or did he come back after all these years and say, give me a contract so I can fight Bisping?
Well, he's saying he's retiring right now, but at the same time, there's all these underground scoop that he's anytime if they can ever make the fight with Khabib, George is going to come back. But I don't really want to go down that road right now, though. I want to talk a little bit about George. One thing that he has done very well, though, is he had that tough fight with Johnny, and he hasn't taken that much damage right now, and he's trying to exit his way out before he becomes that 40-year-old taking a lot of hard losses like Chuck Liddell and Shogun Rua and Dan Henderson, and Anderson's breaking his femur and his calf in half like Anderson Silva and all that kind of stuff. You know, like this, getting fighters to start thinking about not only managing their career and their legacy, but also a proper exit strategy, I think is something that needs to be discussed. And you just don't see. I mean, look at what Chris Liebman's going in after all these years of being a fighter that basically just walked through punches with his head and tried to, it was rock'em sock'em robot style, take punches to his head and fire back with hard shots. And here he is just recently, just last week, fighting in a bare knuckle boxing match. Just getting his whole face split in half. And where is his family? Where is his friends? Where is all this how bad off is this man financially that he even has to do this? And that's sad to me.
Well, and that, at that point, it goes back to the promoters. Is it predatory? Like, how much predatory behavior exists in there? Because ultimately, it is about the dollar, right? Like, when you're a promoter, it's about your bottom line. It's about your investors. It's about your bottom dollar. And so, it's just one of those things where who is going to ultimately be accountable? Who is ultimately accountable for saying, you've reached your damage threshold, you're done?
It should be the commissions. It should be the commissions that could not even license these fighters when it gets to that point.
That's a really good point.
But, they, at the same time, these commissions make money off of these names. So if they can throw Chuck Liddell in there off of his past glory in with Tito Ortiz for a totally pointless trilogy fight at almost 50 years old, and even if it's only going to get 50,000 pay-per-view buys, that's still enough for the commission to get their money. And it is predatory. I think that's a good way of putting it. That they're really using these fighters for their own profit against their health. But then you got the whole argument, well, they're willingly going in there, but when do we step in to protect somebody from themselves?
All I can think of is that one Ultimate Fighter episode with the guy that is now a professional wrestler standing there going, I just want to bang, bro. Let me bang. You know what I'm talking about, right? And everybody was around him going, no, man, not right now. No, you're good. We need some of that.
Yeah. And, in boxing, they used to, one thing you'll never see in MMA that you see a lot in boxing, I won't forget Kell Brook just recently fighting Triple G about 4 or 5 years ago. And to an MMA fan, they would have probably been throwing beer cups at the ring, at the cage, if something like that would have happened, because after the 4th round, it was very clear Triple G was taking over the fight. Kell Brook's corner through the talent, and he hadn't even really taken that much damage. But they started to see, okay, he's outmatched. No, we're not letting him just go in here for another 8 rounds, just in survival mode, getting his ribs battered. We don't want him peeing blood for the rest of the night. We don't want him taking unnecessary damage. Live to fight another day. You never see that in MMA. I've seen that one time. And it was Nick Diaz throwing in the towel for Nate in this fight with Josh Thompson. He gets cracked with a big head kick and gets dropped. The referee hadn't even stepped in yet, and Nick was throwing in the towel. And I know the Diaz brothers are probably about the most prideful, savage-like competitors. And even they know, okay, there's a time when we're not going to let my brother just take unnecessary damage just to show how tough he is. And you don't really see that in MMA much. That you don't see towels being thrown in and corners stepping in to protect their fighter near as much as you do in boxing.
I think some of that is the false sense of security. In boxing, you have multiple knockdowns, and so people think they need to be more attentive, which they do. But in MMA, because the ref is right there and you have the doctors ringside, and they do regularly bring doctors in to take a look at guys, right? They regularly bring doctors in to take a look at fighters just to make sure they're good, you know? I think it gives a false sense of security that you do not need to be just as vigilant for your fighter. You know, just because you have that support system around the ring and you have the comfortable expectation of protection doesn't mean that you shouldn't still be just as attentive.
Totally agree. So on just a little bit of a lighter note, what's coming up on the UFC schedule that you're looking forward to, Amanda? I know we got a big heavyweight fight tonight that, you know, talk about some CTE possibly. These big boys getting hit with those small gloves. You know, we got the John Jones fight coming up next week with Thiago Santos, Holly Holm, and Amanda Nunes, Masvidal and Askren. I mean, some big things. The Stipe
Masvidal-Askren fight is going to be amazing.
That's a great one, isn't it?
That's a great one. I could care less. I mean, Holly Holmes is great, but her claim to fame is kicking Rousey. I mean,
it's kind of like the Buffalo Douglas of MMA right now.
Yeah, I'm not really excited to watch her fight Nunes. I'd rather see Nunes go in against Cyborg again. And can we, for just a second, I want to know why Nunes's fight is not the main. She's the champ.
That's a good point. It's just combat sports.
Period. She's the champ.
I agree, but you also got to remember that this is a sport that merit it comes second to dollars in combat sports. You know, being that superstar attraction, controversial or beloved or controversial, regardless of how it is, gets you prime positioning in the way the
promoters. Those promoters liking to push that bad behavior.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm really excited about I'm not excited about the Nunes fight, to be honest. I could care less. The John Jones fight, I'm just waiting for him to get knocked out. That Masvidal fight. Yeah, because if Nunez does get cocky, it'll be like Anderson Silva with Weidman. He'll get cocky. And it'll happen.
Thiago Santos is a guy who is not afraid to pull the trigger. That's something that's interesting to see with this fight. It's just Jones, love him or hate him. I'm not a huge John Jones fan. I think Chad and Miguel, and they think that I'm like a big John Jones defender because I'm always saying, you know, well, we got to rank him number one on lists of current pound for pound or greatest of all time and all that. It's not because I necessarily
don't have enough phone battery to talk about that.
Yeah, well, we're not going to go all into that, but it's not because I necessarily want to. It's just if we're going to rank him, I mean, I don't see how we can. It is what it is with him. I mean, he's just dominated everybody. But what?
So is Nunes.
Yeah, no, I think Nunes is the greatest women's MMA fighter I've ever seen.
Definitely, but then if you take and you look at Nunes and you look at the fact that not only is she champ, she's a double champ. She's gone up